Beautiful, and we are live for this live class on a beautiful Wednesday afternoon. Greetings, everyone. Hello, hello, hello. And yeah, welcome back to our series of live classes, which I'm hosting this month of August. We had taken a very brief break last week because we had a funeral at home, so I needed to take some time off for that. Otherwise we're back, and I'm glad that we're doing this again. So this is the third live class in a series of 4 classes that we're going to be doing this month of August, exploring various themes of psychospiritual healing. So I see y'all are joining in. Please do say hi to me when you join in, and let me know from where in the world you are joining us. Beautiful. So in today's class, we're going to be exploring the theme of spiritual healing for sexual trauma, right? But first, for those who are joining us for the first time, my name is Tumelo Mareri, and I'm a spiritual healer and a womb healer based in Botswana. And essentially what that means is that I help mostly women heal the womb pains, any inner pain that they might be holding in their bodies, that they might be holding in their lives, in various areas of their lives, right? And so for that, I have 2 offers through which you can work with me. You can either book a once-off session with me or commit to work with me on a more long-term basis through my 6 months private healing program. And I'll be sharing more about that as we're talking, just to present the opportunities and the avenues through which you may heal, right? Awesomeness. So today we're essentially going to be exploring the forms of healing that are possible for you as one who might have encountered like sexual trauma or sexual wounding in your life, right? And so by sexual trauma, we are speaking, for example, about rape or being molested, or really any form of sexual engagement that has been wounding for you or that wasn't even consensual, right? So even as just getting into this conversation, I know that it can be a deeply triggering conversation, especially if this is something you've probably never shared with anyone about, right? So I'm just inviting you to hold yourself in compassion, right? And if at any point this conversation becomes too overwhelming, just feel free to take a breather, to find some resource, and then take up at a later stage. I'm going to be saving a recording of this class, so you can still watch it later, right? Awesome. So we currently, and this has been going on for quite some time in our world, find these various experiences of sexual trauma and sexual wounding, which are really a manifestation of, or rather an inverted manifestation of the experience of sex for the human race. So I'm saying this right at the beginning for us to acknowledge that sex as a creation of the divine is a beautiful thing, right? However, we are finding these inverted ways in which it is being expressed or experienced, which are deeply wounding, and that result in a lot of pain for many across the world, right? So sexual trauma, just in the spectrum of the various traumas that human beings can sustain is one of the deepest traumas that a human being can experience, or that can be inflicted on a human being, right? And so we're having this conversation. One, I know this is a conversation that is rarely spoken about in our society, right? It's right up there with the many taboo topics or subjects that are rarely spoken about in our society. And so I'm just inviting us to come here, to congregate here, and just have honest conversation and some exploration and interrogation of where we're at, right? Especially if you might have encountered this in your life, right? And also we're having this conversation to highlight that healing is possible, right? For you who might be sitting with this pain of sexual pain, right? So part of why sexual trauma is rarely spoken about in our society is that oftentimes it happens within our homes, right? So the perpetrators might be family members, right? Close relatives, or even neighbors, right? And so we're finding that often there isn't that open acknowledgement of the event having happened, or just an open conversation about this having happened, because there might be a desire to protect the person who committed this act, right? And in me sharing about today's class, I did also highlight that this class is also open to men, right? Because sexual trauma not only happens to women, it's also something that men move through as well, right? So the perpetrator could either be a man or a woman, right? And so we're finding that part of the healing might be just to acknowledge the event having happened. It might just be to acknowledge that this thing happened to you, right? And if possible, to have the necessary conversations, right, that you need to have to begin to step into your healing journey, right? So having worked with a number of clients to help them move through this, right, we've come to realize that part of the healing oftentimes is just that, right? For some acknowledgement to happen about this event, this very traumatic event having happened, right? And also sometimes, like, we might find that this is something that might have happened to you while you were young, right? And so, like, your memory around it might be, blurry. You might be doubting whether it actually happened, right? Question your own memory. And so part of the healing in that instance would be to arrive at a point of being able to validate, to accept your experience as valid, and to know that it has happened, right? And also, again, if possible, to step into the necessary conversations, either with family members or whoever was present or whoever was involved, right? That could aid with your healing, right? So again, like a lot of these traumatic sexual experiences, a lot of them, they happen within the home, right? And so in healing this in our own lives and in healing this in the world, just breaking this pattern of sexual trauma and of sexual violence in our world will require that we begin to have these often very difficult conversations, right, within our homes about what has happened to our children or what has happened to us as children, right? We'll also recognize that sexual trauma actually is one of the generational curses or the generational traumas that live within many lineages, right? Because when we sit down just to look at like your own ancestral pattern, right? As somebody who's experienced this, if we were to sit down and just to map, to look at like your ancestral map, right, of your people and the experiences of your people, right? Oftentimes we might find, oftentimes we will find that you as somebody who's experienced this might not be the first one who has experienced it, right? And so that then begins to highlight to us patterns that are active within the lineage, right? And that point towards some form of ancestral trauma that is active within the lineage, right? And this could be active in the form of like your people being victims of sexual trauma or being perpetrators of sexual trauma, right? So in the instances where the perpetrators are family members, right? You might find that whoever that perpetrator is was not the first one, within the lineage, right? And so that calls for a form of unplugging of that wounded template from your lineage, right? It calls for a form of cleansing to clear that from your timeline, to clear that for your people who have, sustained this as victims, and for your people who are moving through this as perpetrators, right? So also like equally to bring our attention to is that, like this theme of sexual trauma that we're exploring today exists within a much wider overarching theme of the sexual misery program that is active within our world, right? And so this sexual misery program, it affects both men and women, right? So by program, I mean like it's a consciousness that is almost like in the air in our world, right? And that affects women in a particular way, right? Where women, in the majority, women find themselves as like victims of sexual violence, right? And men are then mostly the perpetrators of sexual violence, right? So when we go deeper to study that, right, we find that like there is a lot of our conditioning and our programming in this world, right, that gives rise to that, right? It doesn't just manifest on its own, right? It's something that has been building for millennia, and that affects the behaviors and the ways of moving in the world and the ways of interacting in the world of both men and women, right? So like this is quite similar to, the conversation of patriarchy and how it affects both men and women. Like patriarchy is not a person. It's not an individual. It's a consciousness, right, that affects both men and women in different ways and sometimes in similar ways, right? Because men, there are a lot of men also who are victims of sexual violence and sexual trauma, right? So we're wanting to become aware of this consciousness, which is not necessarily a single person or a single individual, right? It's a programming, it's a conditioning. We learn it through the entertainment industry. We learn it through the media. We learn it in how, we're socialized into sex, into our sexuality, etc., right? And so a huge part of, if we were to present like a proactive antidote, right, is to revisit and rewire how we are conditioned or how we are socialized into sex and our sexuality. There's really, really a lot that informs like this phenomenon of of sexual trauma and the sexual misery program, right? Yeah, that was really just a detour for us to realize just how high level some of these things are, right? On the surface, we're seeing it as this, this very painful experience for individuals, right? Being visited upon them by other individuals, right? And we want to look at it at a more expanded view, right? And acquire, so to speak, a more spiritual understanding of what's really happening here, right? And so what we're also finding in our world is that a lot of people are being called, right? A lot of people who have sustained this as a trauma, as a pain, as a wounding, are being called, like this is really an invitation for us to do our healing work so that we may begin to transmute this pain for humanity and for our world, right? So, sexual trauma is one of like the biggest manifestations of the pains of human beings, right? And so in allowing ourselves or in immersing ourselves in opportunities of healing, in saying yes to our own healing, right? We begin to transmute this pain not only for ourselves, not only for our lineages, but also for the collective of humanity, right? Like imagine it as though it were a template, right? Almost like an architecture, a lattice, right? That holds like the coding for how human beings experience their sexuality, how they experience sex, etc., right? So if this template currently has been deeply eroded, deeply wounded, deeply corrupted, which is the case, like it's been deeply corrupted, if, for us to be experiencing this beautiful thing, which is sex, right, in ways that are deeply painful and deeply wounding for other human beings, it means that the template of our sexuality, of sex, our sexual energy has been deeply corroded, wounded, corrupted, right? And so we're finding that you who find yourself having had this traumatic experience, right, are being called. This is an invitation to do your part of the work, right, in cleansing and healing this template for the collective as well, right? Yeah. Yes. What feels true for you, Mr. Forbes? Let me know. Yeah. So just adding to, what we mentioned earlier, that oftentimes, these traumatic experiences of sexual violation might have happened while you were still young, right? And might now require some difficult conversations to be had within the family, It's like, it's a really difficult is the only word I can, find right now. I can only imagine how difficult it would be to bring about such a difficult conversation. But on the other side of this, it's really a divine assignment. On the other side of this assignment is the opportunity for this family, your family, to begin to have difficult conversations, to begin to have open, honest conversations about this thing that happened and that was never spoken about. Guys, like some of the deepest wounds within our families, right, are around the things that were never spoken about. Like some of the things that bring us the deepest pains, right, within our families of origins, right, are things that were never acknowledged, things that were never spoken about, right? Such that sometimes the healing that a family requires is to have the conversation about the thing that they have been not talking about, like trying to pretend that it's not there for years, right? So just that on its own can begin to crack that deep pain, that deep wound within yourself and within the lineage as well, right? You just have no idea how much just you beginning to, just to find the courage to begin to have these difficult conversations, right, can bring about so much healing for your family of origin and for the lineage, for your ancestors who could never speak up about this, right? Who they themselves had been victims of sexual violation but could never speak about it. You know, this slogan of we are our ancestors' wildest dreams, right? So oftentimes when we find ourselves in having had such a difficult experience such as this one, we're being called to heal, not only for ourselves, but also on behalf of our ancestors who, during their time, they could not even begin to find the space or the opportunity to do their own healing, to, even if it were just to admit or to acknowledge that this and that happened to me, right? So just imagine how much your own courageous act of saying yes to your own healing could free your many ancestors who might have had a similar experience. Yeah. Okay. So comment here, long-term effect of childhood sexual abuse and its manifestation, or how it defines people's identity. Yeah. Definitely, like, yeah, there are quite a number of, long-term effects, you know, across like various areas of one's life, right? Which, may include like how we show up in intimate relationships, right? How we relate with our own bodies, how we show up in relationship with our bodies, how we show up in intimate relationships with people of the same gender as the one who was our perpetrator, right? Definitely, like, it has long-term effects, right? And so, you know, like, as I mentioned at the beginning of the conversation, like, part of why we're having this conversation, right, is just to share the message that, guys, healing is possible, right? And also for us to begin to see the many effects that sexual trauma can have in your life, right? Oftentimes you might think this and that is not working. You know, sometimes there might be, you might find yourself like struggling with anxiety and not knowing why, right? Or just having like various difficulties in different areas of your life and not knowing why, you know. And oftentimes when we do the deep inner work, we might find the linkages to this experience you might have had, right? I also need to highlight that because we're different people, you know, like, the long-term effects or how it shows up in our lives might not always be the same, right? And so just inviting each and every one of you, you know, when the time feels right and you feel ready, to begin to do that inner work, you know, to see what's currently still sitting within you with regards to this traumatic experience you've had, right? And to also look at the ways in which it informs your life right now, the ways in which it might also be holding you back from the fullest manifestation of your life, and then to explore the ways in which you could begin to heal that, you know? Yes. Lovely. Also, let me know if you have questions, okay? I would be happy to answer those, right? So another form of sexual violation, sexual trauma that is rarely spoken about is the one that happens within intimate relationships and especially within marriages, right? So, like, for a lot of us on the African continent, we find ourselves within cultures or traditions that indirectly encourage sexual exchanges that are not necessarily always consensual, right? So you might be aware of how, you know, some men and some women are initiated into the institution of marriage, might be told that, you know, never to deny, you know, one spouse of sexual intercourse, right? such that in instances where there might be abuse in a marriage, in an intimate relationship, right, it might be difficult for the spouse who's being abused to speak up, right? So that's another thing that we need to begin to have honest conversation about, right? I know there has been conversation about it, about rape that happens in marriages, right? So this too needs to be acknowledged, and this too needs to be healed, right? Yes. Awesome. Let me know if you have any thoughts or any questions, right? So yeah, you might also be wondering, but how do we heal this? What is the healing that is available or that is possible for sexual trauma, right? So the first one is timeline repair, called timeline repair, coupled with quantum repatterning. And I'll break that down, right? So timeline repair entails energetically traveling to the moment of this traumatic event, right? And beginning to heal the imprint of that event, on your emotional body and on your nervous system, right? It's a process really of recoding, one of clearing that imprint, right, of the traumatic event, and beginning to recode, right, your inner person, right, so that you may come into harmony and into wholeness, right? Yeah, so we work a lot with the emotional body, right? Because I know I've mentioned this in previous classes, but emotions are quite a big deal, right? Because if we're holding stagnant emotions in our bodies, right, in the long term, these stagnant emotions can develop into physical disease, right? So what we oftentimes experience as physical disease, fibroids, cysts within the womb space, right, are often a long-term manifestation of emotions that were at one time stagnant within our bodies, right, and solidified over a period of time, right? So with timeline repair one, we energetically return to the moment of this traumatic event, right? And we journey with the younger version of yourself who experienced this, right? And facilitate healing for you at that level, right? Also working with the memory of the event in your body, right? Cleansing that memory, rewiring it, right? Freeing it of the pain, freeing it of the trauma as it sits within your body, right? And then the quantum repatterning comes in when we now bring in and begin to cultivate like a nourishing environment within your body, right? Whereas if previously you might have felt unsafe in your body as a woman or as a man, right? We begin to create within you, within your psyche, within your nervous system, a state of feeling safe within your body, right? If in the moment of the traumatic event, you were filled, like you were overcome by the emotion of fear, such that even 10 years after or 15 years, you're still feeling like frozen within that fear. We want to dismantle that lattice of fear, like within you and over your life, and just clear it, right? And over and above that, having cleared the fear, how would you want to feel? Even working with your spiritual team, and maybe also your ancestral helping spirits, right, to institute, a sense of like feeling calm or feeling protected, of feeling free, within your body. Yeah. And like this timeline repair and the quantum repatterning are things that I offer in like my once off healing session, right? Or within my more long term 6 months private healing program, right? Yeah, like for anybody who's coming to my work for the first time, I always recommend that. You start with the once off private healing session, and then after that, we can see if you'd want to continue for the 6 months, right? Yeah. And in the once off healing sessions, we're definitely going to do the timeline repair, right? And also the quantum repatterning, just to rewire your inner environment, your inner being, your inner psyche, right? Yes. And earlier, Mr. Forbes was talking about just the long-term effects, of childhood sexual abuse, and I added to that mentioning that when we sit down and look at the entirety of your life, we want to look at the ways in which this experience continues to inform or to influence how you show up in all of your life, right? And possible areas where there might be influences, like a wounded influence, might be in your relationship with your body, right? Or this experience could affect intimate relationships or just relationships with men and women, right? If the perpetrator might have been a man, it might affect how you relate with the masculine in human form and also energetically, right? And if the perpetrator were a woman, it might affect how you interact with the feminine, in human form, in the form of women, or just energetically, right, in its various forms. So we want to look at that, because when we're speaking of the feminine, the feminine affects areas of creativity, of birthing into the world, either birthing babies or birthing projects, ideas, etc., either as a woman or as a man, right? The masculine affects, matters of structure, of building, of money, of finances, of your career, of your business, etc., right? So we would want to see, has there been any negative impact on any of these areas of your life as a result of this experience, right? If there has been, then we would want to begin to facilitate a process of healing around that, right? This would likely be more on a long term, right? I also need to highlight that sexual trauma is something that is quite deep, right? That we truly wouldn't be able to conclude or find a full resolution for in just one session, right? The once-off session would definitely be, of value, right? However, for a pain this deep, you could start with a once-off session, and then later when you're ready, I'd highly, highly recommend that you work with somebody, preferably one-on-one, on a long-term basis, right? To really go deep, into the multiple layers of this work, right? And so, so earlier I mentioned how, when we do the timeline repair and the quantum repatterning, we're also working with the younger versions of yourself who experienced this event, right? And so this younger self could either be when you were still a child or when you were a teen, depending on when this event happened, right? And so part of the healing will include a lot of either inner child work or inner teen work, right? To work with that younger version of yourself, right? Who encountered this experience, right? Often we might find that when an event has been so traumatic, right? Our lives can become frozen in time, at that particular age, right? Yeah, this isn't the experience for everyone, right? But if it's deeply, deeply traumatic, say maybe it were to happen when you're 8 years old, right? You might find that our lives almost feel like frozen, like at the point when we were 8. And then the inner child, like we begin to live our lives through that version of our inner child, right? So we want to facilitate healing for that inner child or that inner teen who moved through this experience, right? Yeah, like this is really, really important, right? If you were to do any part of this healing, right? So we've spoken about, I'll mention all of them first, right? But in conclusion, I want to say if you were to not do any of them and select the most important, it would be inner child work or the inner teen healing work, right? To just work with that, like the younger version of yourself, right? Who moved through this experience, and heal her or him, at an inner level, okay? Psychologically, emotionally, spiritually, somatically as well. Very, very, very important, okay? Yes. So what we've already spoken about now is possibly healing your relationship with the masculine or the feminine, depending on your specific experience, right? This could also have an impact on your intimacy, right? Either your relationship with intimacy or how you show up in intimacy with people of the same gender as the perpetrator, all right? It could also have an impact on your relationship with sex itself and your sexuality, right? So we also want to deeply explore that area of your life, right? If there has been any impact, and then begin to facilitate healing for that area, right? So for some people, it might be that because of this experience, you really struggle with sex, or you have no desire, you don't want it, etc. And if you are desiring a different experience of sex and of your sexuality, then we want to do healing around that, right? And then in terms of your relationship with your body, it could be that because of this experience, maybe you're not feeling safe in your body, or you're not feeling safe to move around in the world, right? And so we want to begin to rewire, the inner environment of your body, right? To begin to cultivate a sense of safety, of being protected in the world, right? As within, so is without, right? So we want to first begin cultivating it on the inside, right? Such that you may also begin to experience it externally, right? So a lot of this healing work is internal, right? We could do like a physical cleanse, just to, like to cleanse if there is like an ancestral thread, like if there is, if we find that there is an ancestral pattern that is active and that is likely informing this, we could do a physical cleanse for it, right? However, a lot of the work will be internal, right? We could also do like physical work for the womb healing, like for women. I would also highly, highly recommend that you begin to do womb healing work, right? Because that is, like, if we're to look for the physical point on your body where the sexual trauma took place, it is often within your womb space, right? For men as well, you gentlemen might not have like a physical womb, right? But you do have like an energetic womb, an energetic creative center, right? That becomes like deeply hurt, should a sexual violation happen, right? There is like an energetic portal here around your womb space called the sacral chakra, which governs matters of pleasure, of intimacy, of creativity, etc., which can become deeply, deeply wounded and fractured, in the event of a sexual trauma. So we want to begin to facilitate healing for that center, right? To bring it into balance, to bring it into harmony, right? For both men and women, right? So that you may begin to experience, your sexuality in an organic way, in an aligned way, right? That brings you joy, that brings you pleasure, right? Although I know that might not always be like the primary intention or goal, right? But eventually we might want to get there, right? If you're somebody who's now struggling with sex and sexuality as a result, would want to do the healing such that you may begin to experience sex and sexuality in ways that are organic, as they were meant for you by the divine, right? Yes. Let me know if you have any questions. So good to see you all here. Familiar faces. Great to have you here. Another area where there might be an influence or an impact is in your parenting, right? So say, for example, the traumatic event might have happened to you when you were 3 or 5, right? This could impact how you raise your children when they're around that age, right? So the manifestation of the impact could be, as varied as we are in the world, right? And I'm just mentioning these to highlight, the various, areas of your life, which might carry some of the imprint of this traumatic event, and which could be, an opportunity or an invitation for healing, right? So the last one, as mentioned, is womb healing, right? As womb healing or sacral chakra healing, right? As the point where this traumatic event happened, right? And we're wanting to facilitate this healing so that we may begin to release the pain held within the womb or your creative space as a result of this event, right? We want to clear out if by any chance you're holding some emotions here in your creative space, flowing from this event, we want to release them, right? In a more expanded conversation of womb healing and womb medicine, we often talk about, the roots or the origins of womb pain, such as like heavy bleeding, prolonged periods, menstrual cramping. Some of these often that as a result of emotions that have become stagnant within the womb space, right? They might also be as a result of the manifestation of the pain sustained as a result of sexual trauma, right? So always, when somebody comes in for womb healing and clearing, one of the things that we either need to check in with spirit or with the client is whether there might be any history of sexual trauma or sexual violence, for them as individuals or for the lineage, right? And some of this physical pain held within the womb or the creative center can also manifest as, fibroids, cysts, miscarriages, in various forms, really, right? And so when we step into the healing work, we would want to see what the case is for you specifically, right? So I'm just mentioning these, speaking in general terms, because for specific individuals, you'll find that you will have like an experience that is very specific and unique to you, right? And so my invitation for you today is, if this has resonated with you in any way and you're feeling called to begin to do the healing work for your life, for your body, for your womb, for your creative space, right? I do invite you to heed that call, deeply encourage you to heed that call, You could just book a once-off session with, a trusted healer, or wherever it feels comfortable for you to begin this healing process, right? Remember, A part of the reason why we're having this conversation is just to highlight that healing is possible. I have met people either in one-off sessions or in long-term programs, who have committed to their healing, and they have seen, the results. They have felt themselves beginning to heal. And something as, tragic and painful as sexual trauma, we do wish we could take it away, right? But because of, the permanence of time, it's not something we can delete or that we can take away from your life, right? But we can do the inner work, that begins to integrate the trauma for you, right? And allows you to arrive at a point where you're feeling better, you're feeling more whole, you're feeling more within yourself, you're feeling more like yourself, right? Yeah. And in case you might be interested in doing this healing work with me, I have 2 offers through which we could work together, right? So as mentioned, I have a once-off healing session that you could book, right? It's a 2-hour healing session where we could dive into this work, and we would, most definitely do a timeline repair and a quantum repatterning, right? I've seen this yield such beautiful results for individuals. And so it's something I highly, highly recommend, right? There is a link on my bio, right? And on that link, there are a number of tabs, and there's also a tab there for you to book a 2-hour private healing session, right? You can do that, and it would be a joy. And a privilege to hold healing space for you, right? And this is open to both men and women. If you're ready to heal, let's do the work. We have many generations of ancestors and many generations of descendants who will be, celebrating us and feeling a whole lot of gratitude for us, or towards us for having said yes to the work and committed to the work, right? So that's the once-off healing session. And I also have a 6 months private healing program for you who might want to work with me on a more long-term arrangement, right? In the 6 months healing program, we meet once every week for like a 3-hour session, right? Yes, like the details of that are also on my bio link. So you can go check that out. Within the 6 months program, we have space now to also do like inner child work, inner teen work, body healing work, intimacy healing work, sexual healing, right? Mother wound healing, if that is something that comes up and that becomes necessary for us to do. Yes, I think I've mentioned intimacy healing work. Just looking at like going deep into the various areas of your life that might have been impacted by the sexual violation and the sexual trauma, right? Yeah. And lastly, I just want to mention this again, right? Oftentimes we find ourselves having moved through very, very difficult experiences, and you might be asking why, why did this happen to me, right? And I believe through a much more expanded view and understanding of the journeys and the commitments of the soul, right? So oftentimes we are being called. We are called to a specific experience, and being called at a particular time in history or our lives broadly, right? We're being called to transmute and to heal that pain, not only for ourselves, but for our lineages and for the collective human race, right? So oftentimes you might find that you were not the first one to experience this in your lineage, right? There might be troves of grandmothers who also experience this very painful experience, right? Such that as you heal, you're also helping them heal. As you heal, you're breaking this generational pattern, or this generational curse or trauma for your lineage, right? So here now we find ourselves being presented with an opportunity for you to say, it ends with me, right? It definitely is not, like, healing is not easy, right? However, when you are able to find the courage and the strength to say yes to your inner healing, to your spiritual healing, your life will never be the same for the better. And the life of your ancestors, the life of your descendants, because they live through you, will never be the same, right? Yes, so yeah, that's about it for our class today. It's been an honor, it's been a privilege to engage in such a discussion with you. I know, like, this is not an easy conversation to step into, you know, but we need to have it at some point, right? We need to talk about this, and most importantly, not just the existence of sexual trauma, but what to do about it in ways that are holistic, in ways that have long-term and sustainable gains and a sustainable impact, right? So yeah, let's continue, you know, leaning more into these difficult areas of our existence and as humanity, and trusting that like we're good for it. We're going to be good for it. Like we are better having these conversations than not having them, right? Yeah. Thank you so much. Yeah, it's been such a joy to see you all here. Thank you for having come here to join me and to journey in such ways, right? So I'm going to be saving this recording here on my hear this conversation who might be in need, right, of such. Please let them know there will be a recording here, right? Yeah. And so until next week, until the next live class, bye.